Will you start introduce Daniel? Okay, I will do. Okay.
Kristen, you could do that.
Okay, I will do it. Okay. Welcome to our webinar today. Today we have Daniel Filcher. She is the past president of Nebraska Language Association, and now she is the executive director, right?
Yes.
Did I say it right? Of
Yes.
NEPLA as well. So she has, I think you have been to the Advocacy Day for several times, right? Yeah.
Actually, last year was my first time in person, Washington, D.C. with it. I did go to the virtual ones though, but
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah. And Daniel is also one of the, I have to say, the leaders in Nebraska with language education. And she has done a lot. She gets involved in a lot of things. So we are very happy to have her. Daniel, please take it away.
Will do. As Crystal said, I am the executive director of the Nebraska Languages Association, formerly NYLA. We have incorporated and become NEBLA, and we will be sending out some publication early next year about the changeover. But today, I will be sharing my experiences with my first time joining JNCL-NCLIS in Washington, D.C. So if folks want to know how to advocate for their languages, I can give you kind of a crash course from a first timer's perspective on that. So I'm going to adjust my little toggle screen up there so I don't get distracted. Okay, so the main objectives with this would be making sure that you folks are informed about what JNCL-NCLIS is, who they are, what they do. Another thing that's very important is being aware of current language legislation policies. It's not just something that's happening in our classroom or our state. These are issues that are being taken very seriously at the national level in Capitol Hill. And also, hopefully, I can give folks some tips and tricks on how to be an advocate for language learners in your state. Okay, so we just have a few people in the chat, but if you could drop into the chat the number 1 through 5, 5 being you've had a lot of experience with JNCL-NCLIS, you could, probably teach this webinar. To 1, you don't even know what the acronym stands for. Let's see. So, let's see, about a 2 in there. Okay. So if you drop a number in the chat, just number 1 through 5. And I'm not going to be acclaimed to be a 5, but I will be able to tell you from a first timer's perspective about what this is. So there are a couple of things I'm going to go through, just give you an overview of what the organization is and who some important folks are that you can reach out to for more information. Some of the current language education legislation or bills that are going through the House and the Senate and being discussed on Capitol Hill. Also, what would you expect on advocacy days? It takes place over 2 days in DC. The next advocacy days on Capitol Hill are occurring March 9th through the 10th, I believe. And this is just kind of give you a rundown of what you can expect on those days, what's going to happen, and how you can get prepared. And then, because my first time advocating for JNCL-NCLIS was my first time in Washington, D.C. ever, I do have some, fun little facts about what should you do in D.C.? What's a first timer's perspective with that? So first, who or what is JNCL-NCLIS? What does it stand for, basically? It's a long acronym that refers to the Joint National Committee for Languages, and the National Council for Languages and International Studies. This is a super PAC in Washington, D.C. that keeps up to date on all legislation related to language learning, education reform, and they're the group that puts together advocacy days and notifications to all of their stakeholders. They are the experts when it comes to language policy with that. And they've actually been quite around for quite some time here. So just some of the faces on the board. Amanda Seawald is the current executive director, I believe, along with John Bernstein. He's the director of government relations. So he's kind of the person who helps put together the meetings between constituents and their representatives. We also have additional members. Some people may recognize some of these folks here. Linda Ingans, in addition to being immediate past president, she's also the executive director for the Global Seal of Biliteracy. And Megan is the executive director for the French Teachers Association of the United States. We also have additional members at large, and I've met a few of these folks. Jean Marie and I, we sat together during our language advocacy days. She is in Kentucky, a language teacher. Megan Worcester is the current president for the Indiana chapter of language teachers, I believe. And she's a really great resource for the Midwest. So if you have any questions or if you want to reach out to anybody, any of these folks would definitely be very helpful. Probably the most daunting thing about advocacy days and why it might be so difficult is the legislation. But really, one thing I want to let people know is you don't need a degree in political science to be an advocate for your students. You don't need to, you know the ins and outs of, checks and balances or the government and all these kinds of things. All you need to know is what is important for your language learners and how to talk to people. And as teachers, we talk all day, every day, so we know how to do these things. But just to kind of give you folks an overview, the main pieces of legislation that are discussed on a fairly regular basis are the following here. Now, at the end of this presentation, I will show a QR code and a bit.ly link that you can get a copy of this presentation. But each of these titles here, they refer to a distinct piece of legislation. And if you click on these links, these will take you to something called a one-pager. Yes, I got it. Thank you. Which is a breakdown of what the bill or the request is talking about. Okay. And I won't have the time to go through all of them here, but I will say things to look at with the one pagers. First and foremost, the challenge up at the top of that page. It's the main reason for, its presence or it being discussed in the Senate or congressional floor. There is also supporting data with each of the one pagers. These are things, especially when you are face to face with your representatives, having specific data points and numbers that they can kind of grasp onto, it will help, strengthen your position with that. They do also outline a solution. It's just basically a condensed history of the bill proposal, and it includes who the representatives are who brought the proposal to the floor. Sometimes it's Republicans, sometimes it's Democrats, but they'll tell which state they come from as well. It will outline some key issues about the history of it, whether it was passed in, the last year or so, if it will try to aim to solve certain tasks with these things. But the one pagers, probably the most important thing to look at is the request, which is down at the bottom of each of these pages. This is what you want to talk to your representatives about. So it could be a funding request. For instance, we'll get into some of these a little bit later, but this is what you would want to focus on when you're talking with your representatives. And while you can go ahead and look through some of the one pagers for each of these, I will just kind of give a quick overview of some of the most important ones. Probably the biggest one is the World Language Education Assistance Program. This one, it refers to all K-12 school districts to help establish, improve, and carry out world language and dual language immersion programs. And these are grants that you can, apply for. They are good for 3 years, but they can also be renewed. One of the great things about this piece of legislation, it's a bipartisan effort. So as you can see, the two representatives, Jen from Virginia, is a Republican, and Jimmy is a Democrat from California. So this has the support of both parties with it. This would be a good one to present to your representatives. And the main request under this bill is to support its reintroduction. It was introduced a couple of years back, but they just want to reintroduce it to update some of the wording in there. The second one is this Biliteracy Education Seal in Teaching Act, or in other words, the BEST Act, which helps states programs that implement the seal of biliteracy. For instance, Lincoln Public Schools, the district that I belong to, we are in the process of trying to organize school applications in order to have all of our top level, level 4 German, Spanish, French, Arabic, take a proficiency test in order to be eligible for the seal. So if we wanted to get funding for our proficiency test, this would be the grant that money would come from. And I am also one of the members of our Seal of Biliteracy Advisory Board, and I can tell you that Nebraska is growing exponentially with our seal applicants. Each year we are getting hundreds and hundreds more. So this one would be a really great one to show with each of your representatives. Certain other ones, they do also span the gap from elementary education, secondary education, as you can see here with Senator Paul Simon's Study Abroad Act. This one is referring to post-secondary institutions that have a study abroad program. This one would help fund each of these. And the main request would be to support the reintroduction of this act. Now, advocating for world language, yes, there are some instances where some of our political biases kind of come into play. For instance, I am from the state of Nebraska, and Nebraska, we are a heavily Republican state, but that doesn't mean that we can't advocate for our programs. For instance, the World Language Advancement and Readiness Program, the WLARA grant, would provide grants to local, state, and education agencies that have a junior ROTC program. So this would be in line with national defense and, military preparedness. So that would be one thing that I would probably push for our Republican representatives to take a look at, because this would fall in line with their agenda, but at the same time, it would help world language programs with it. We also have some additional ones that were new. For instance, the Language Education Data Enhancement Act. This one's important because in order to have an accurate picture of our need for language assistance, we need to have some kind of a methodology to collect data. This would help that goal. We also have a Native American Language Resource Center. This has been growing leaps and bounds within this last decade. I think it was the United Nations declared 2020 to 2030 the decade for Native American languages. And the main request for this one is to support funding for this organization for $3 million for the fiscal years 2025 and 2026. In Nebraska itself, we have 3 institutions that offer 7 degrees based in indigenous languages, which is why we are trying to incorporate more, not just the world languages, but also indigenous languages, less commonly taught languages, visual manual languages with sign language. This one would be a good resource for indigenous language preservation. Now, it was kind of a quick overview of all those bills, so if you take a look at this presentation later, you'll be able to get more in depth with it. But what can you expect when you head to Washington, D.C.? Now, there are some things you should do to prepare yourself before you head to Washington, but then I'll go through kind of what are some things that you can expect on the advocacy days. So first and foremost, you want to make sure you get registered. For each membership, there is an LAD member. If your state organization is a part of that and pays their dues, you can use the member rate on that. While it does look expensive, if you take into account how much we would spend to go to a conference, whether it's state, regional, or national, this is very much in line with the expectation of that. Plus, it is very, very important that we all represent, especially this next unit or this next theme for advocacy days is all states, all learners with those. And when you get registered, the Joint National Committee is going to send you a link for the Advocacy Days app, which you can download on your phone. If you have an iPhone, you can go to the App Store, or you can go to Google Play via Android with that. And this app will help kind of collate all the information you need when you're in DC. They will send you a to-do list, which is just, making sure you take care of these items on these certain days or at these certain times. And make sure also to check your email frequently for that. But in the app on your phone, there is a folder down here in the More selection. And one thing you want to do is to print out copies of that one pager for each of the bills, because when you go and meet your representatives, it is very helpful if you compile some kind of a folder or little booklet with all of the information that they need. Yes, the Joint National Committee does provide your representative copies of all of these things, but it is helpful when you're sitting in the meeting with them to have copies for them and their aides. So make sure you take a look at those, print out like 5, 8, 10 copies. It depends on how big of a group of advocates you have coming there, but you can take a look at those and print them out for your representatives. The other thing you want to do is work with your state organization to create your state one pager. This is extremely helpful because it gives your representatives kind of a snapshot of all of the things happening with language in your state. They do provide a template for you so that you can take a look and see, okay, this would be, some of the important information that they're looking for. I've included a couple of examples from other states, Utah, Missouri, and I have put Nebraska's on there. We need to update it a little bit, but this is currently what ours looks like. Anytime you can include data in this kind of a visual format, great, because your representatives are going to need a quick little snapshot of all of the great things you're doing in your state. And thankfully, Dr. Nick Ziegler, who is our distance learning coordinator through ESU5 in Beatrice, he sent out this language advocacy survey, and we got some really great feedback and data from this. So in 2023, 218 Nebraska administrators, counselors, and stakeholders responded to this. And the overwhelming response is world language is very much supported in Nebraska. But at the same time, we also have an extreme teacher shortage, and world language is one of the biggest areas in our state with that deficit. You also want to highlight things that are unique with your state and some of the great things we're doing. For instance, the map that you see on this is the number of schools that we have that participate in distance learning. So out of Beatrice, all of these schools are taken care of with a world language program through the distance learning program. Another big thing to highlight with your one pager of your state is seal it by literacy information. Now, they say put this all on one page, but there was so much and so many great things that we were doing in Nebraska that I kind of had to stretch it out between two. But anything information-wise, like for instance, on the 24th and 25th of June in 2024, Nebraska was highlighted at the U.S. Department of Education for the promotion of bilingualism in our education system. Anything that relates to dual language programs, anything that relates to the state policy and legislation is very, very helpful. And also if your state has mainly Republican representatives, it is also helpful to include an economic insight with this. For instance, in 2022-23, almost 4,000 international students were enrolled in the colleges, and they contributed 111 million to the state economy. So anytime your one pager can include those kinds of pieces of information, that is a great way to go. And if you are a singleton who goes to the advocacy days, you can create this on your own, but it is helpful if you have a state organization that puts all of this together for you. Okay? So that's before you go. Make sure you print out copies of your one pagers for the legislation, and make sure you bring copies of your state one pager to highlight all of the things that you're doing. When you get to Washington, D.C., a couple of things. That first advocacy day, that is very comparable to one of our language conferences. We have welcoming activities, there are keynote speakers. We had a really great one this last year, Jacob Kushner. He talked about Stories Without Borders and his work in, in the Caribbean with his connection to Puerto Rico, and it was just an amazing, amazing keynote speaker. We also have kind of your breakdown of your schedule for that first day with that, and I did link in the copy of our 2025 program that we were given. But with that first day, there are some things that you just kind of want to have as your personal goals. First and foremost, kind of put some names and faces to folks who are directly involved with the board. That way, these people, if you are in your state and there are, like for instance in Nebraska, Crystal informed me that Nebraska Wesleyan is drastically reducing their staff in languages. And that would be something where we could reach out to JNCL-NCLIS, contact them and say that we need some assistance in, putting out a public statement or, advocating against the loss of all of these positions. Putting names and faces to that board, that's the step one for you. Also, if you have any questions about what you're going to expect on the next day in Capitol Hill, this would be a great time to ask with it. Now, if you come with a group of people from your state, the most important thing for that first day is to strategize with all of your members, because you have multiple representatives in government, and it's entirely possible that you will get split up into groups and certain people will meet with specific representatives. Now, unfortunately, I was the only representative from Nebraska last year. I'm going to hope I can change that up this next coming year. But if you work with a group of people, it is helpful that you can kind of, network with other states. And in that vein, make sure you bring your business cards, because you're going to be making connections with your counterparts in other states, and, being able to have those resources outside of the state is extremely helpful for those. Also, last thing you want to make sure is confirm your meetings with your representatives. Within your advocacy app, they will send you a notification of confirmation with your representatives. Now, when you meet your representatives, sometimes they will send their aides in their place, and that's okay. They will, be well informed on why you're coming and what you're going to be talking about with that. But I was fortunate. I got to meet our Senator Deb Fischer face to face, and so I had to make sure I confirmed my meeting with her with that. And again, keep checking your email. Email's the end all and be all of everything. Now, on to day 2. This is where you will meet your representatives. This is where all of that work to put together these advocacy days will be put into play. But before we talk about when, where, what, and how this is going to happen, I do want to give one important point. Now, during advocacy days, when you are meeting your representatives, you are not a Republican. You are not a Democrat. You are not an independent. You are a language advocate. Okay. Now, you have to remember this goal. I will tell you, my personal politics may or may not be in line with our representatives, but I will work with them in order to help language learners in my state. and you have to adopt that mindset when you work with yours as well. Okay. That being said, some of the logistics for this, the when and where, your meetings are going to take place with your representatives on the second day between 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. And, depending on how many people are in your group, how many representatives you have to meet, they could all be together or they could be spread out. For instance, I had quite a bit of time between my second and my third meeting that day. So I took the time to kind of take a stroll around Capitol Hill. But your meetings are generally going to take place in two areas. First, your Senate meetings are going to take place in the Russell Senate Office Building, which is just north of the United States Capitol. And the House of Representatives, your Congress people, they're going to be in the Cannon House office building. Another helpful tip, using the metro when you're there, the Capitol South Silver Line is right next to your meeting places. So if you're using the metro to get around, that's the station that you would get off at. But each of your meetings, they will be typically between one of these two places, and they're very close to one another. Okay. When you get to meet with your senators, what that's going to look like is you will get to meet both of your senators from your state. Every state has two of them. Depending on your group, you may be split. One group sees one representative, the other one sees the other. Because I was a singleton, I got to sit with both. So I met Deb Fisher and her aides, and Pete Ricketts. He did send his aide for his meeting with me for that. You will also meet the congressional representative from your specific district. Now, Nebraska, it's a fairly small state. We only have three representatives. Mike Flood is from District 1 in the Lincoln and I believe Norfolk area. Don Bacon is Omaha, and Adam Smith is the rest of the state in the western part there. So depending on where you live, I live in Lincoln, so my representative was Mike Flood, and he has sent his aides for the meeting. When you're in your meeting, now all of this work that you've put into it, here's the tricky part. At maximum, you are going to have 15 to 20 minutes to meet and talk with your representatives. So this is where your skill in creating an elevator speech is going to come in very handy. So knowing that you're going to have a very limited amount of time to speak with them, it makes, it very much focuses what you want to say. And the sad fact of the matter is you're not going to be able to cover all of your legislative asks in one pagers. I think in total there were 8 or 9 of them for this last one, but with meeting 3 representatives for 15 to 20 minutes, that's not enough time to get through them all. So this is where strategizing with your state team comes into play. Which ones will have the best chance of being heard? Which bills or legislative pieces will speak most to your representatives and their interests? Focus on that, okay? Again, 15 to 20 minutes is not a lot. You are also possibly going to meet your representative's aides instead of the representative directly. No matter who it is, make sure you collect their business cards and send thank you notes later. Making those kinds of connections that will help strengthen your communication with them and, bring them over to your side with your advocacy efforts, okay? And also, I know the 15 to 20 minute mark, it's very tempting just to dive right into the legislative asks, but don't discount the small talk. Get to know these folks and, you might learn something interesting. For instance, I know Deb Fisher's principal aide, Eduardo Sacasa, he's actually a heritage speaker and his family hails from Nicaragua. Mike Flood, he has a Book of the Month club. Granted, it's very much geared toward history and, politics, but, it's great to see those kinds of things about your representatives and to get to know them better like that. That helps you build your relationships. And again, have copies of your one-pagers and your state information for them ready to go. Okay. Now, when you are meeting your representatives. One thing else you should do before you go is do some background research on who represents you in Washington, D.C. So in Nebraska, we have 2 senators and we have 3 congresspeople. Now, you're not going to have to, know every single thing about each of these people, but knowing, for instance, the committees that they belong to, maybe a little bit of their political history, this will help you with, talking with them. Now, I did say you have to leave your personal politics at the door. So whether you're Republican, whether you're Democrat, your personal beliefs, you have to leave that outside. But if you get to know your representatives, you can speak to their political interests. For instance, Deb Fischer, she is part of the Senate Appropriations Committee and the Senate Armed Forces. The Appropriations Committee relates to budget and with money. So a recommended strategy with her would be to promote the WALARA bill because that would fit her armed services agenda. It promotes the connection of world language programs to junior ROTC Army programs. And also the BEST Act, because one of the great things about the seal of biliteracy is it saves students money in college. And that also helps with, appropriations and budgeting for the year. We also have Pete Ricketts, who is one of our senators. One thing with him, he's part of the Senate Committee for Foreign Relations. And in that case, again, strategy with him would be promoting how the World LEAP Act and Paul Simon Study Abroad would help better those foreign relations with the United States with that, because you can't really understand, people from another country unless you actually travel there. So that would be a good one to also promote with him. In addition to their profile, I have put the names of their aides. So go back here. For Deb Fischer, we have Eduardo Sacasa and Rachel Hudson. Again, make sure you grab business cards so you can send thank yous later. For Pete Ricketts, his aides are Anna Wilson and Rebecca Unruh. I met Rebecca. She's a very lovely young lady and who really knows her stuff on Capitol Hill. For my representative for Congress, I belong to District 1, so I met with Mike Flood's aide, Joshua McGuire. Again, very nice young man who's very active in the political scene there. Now, Mike Flood is part of the National Guard and Reserve Caucus. Again, going with the WALARA Act because it speaks to, national defense, but it also bridges that gap between world language and, a representative's agenda. So if you go with a group, it really depends on where you live and who you're going to meet. So for instance, living in Lincoln or Norfolk, we would meet with Mike Flood. However, if we lived in Omaha, we would meet Congressman Don Bacon. And again, if you do a little bit of background checking with him, he served in the Air Force, active duty. He achieved the rank of Brigadier General. Definitely the WALARA Act would be a good one to promote with him. The other thing is something very interesting. He serves on many international relations caucuses, including the Czech Caucus, Filipino Caucus, Friends of Spain, more. And so with him, he would also be a good one to encourage to join the Language Caucus. This is something that also, discusses more languages on Capitol Hill. He may be one who would join. And then our third representative in Congress is Adrian Smith. He takes on the whole of Western Nebraska. He was a Gering native. He worked as an educator, so he would speak to the teacher in all of us. We would be able to illustrate how the BEST Act would help students better prepare for college and be more competitive in the workforce. So taking the time to get to know your representatives on Capitol Hill is very worthwhile. And if your state organization has advocacy chairs, this would be kind of something to strategize with them. Okay. Now, the thing is, with 15 to 20 minutes, you have a very short amount of time to make your pitch to them. The other thing is, don't expect a definitive yes or no from them. So if you ask them to support, the WALARA Act or the reintroduction of the BEST Act, you're not going to get a yes or no. But the purpose of your meeting with them is get the conversation going, maintain contact with their office, and you are the world language expert. You are the teaching expert, education expert. They are going to be relying on you when they, bring these motions to the floors. Okay. So, like I said, you don't need to have a degree in political science to be an advocate, so long as you have some basic information about what is discussed on Capitol Hill and who your representatives are. That's all you really need. And you can fight for language policy for your students and your learners. And the last thing I have for you folks, again, my first time going to Capitol Hill for the Joint National Committee for Languages was my first time in Washington, D.C. ever. So if you've never been there before, I can give you some quick tips, things to see, ways to get around, all those kinds of things so that you enjoy your trip the most. And I can also kind of give you a little bit of a financial overview of my cost in there. Now, my first mistake was I didn't realize there were two airports in DC. The Ronald Reagan DC airport, that one is more centralized. It's very much in the middle with it. But they also have Dulles International Airport, which if you're a diehard 2 fan, you'll be familiar with that airport as well. But this one is to the west of the city. The good thing is both airports are accessible to the metro line. It's the Silver Metro line. It's typically about 30 to 40-minute travel time between Dulles and the center of town. Now, when you're getting ready to do your flight information, I flew out of Lincoln with the layover in Chicago. I did pay extra for choosing my seats because, there are certain spots on planes where I feel most comfortable. On the seat, on the wing, you get the least amount of turbulence. And in total, my cost for the flight was 610, 615, around that area, which if you travel from a larger airport, it might be cheaper that way. Oh, and also a pro tip. Whenever you're flying, the cheapest you can get your tickets for are 6 weeks out on a Tuesday, because that's a sweet spot of where airlines don't exactly know whether they're going to get enough people to fill the plane to the point where they realize, okay, now we're going to start getting people to purchase it. So 6 weeks before you leave, that's the cheapest you can get. The next thing, I stayed at the Hyatt Regency near Dulles, and I used the airport shuttle for transport. It was about 5 minutes. I didn't have to get a rental car when I was in DC, which was great. But if I'm good, one thing I am going to do differently for this upcoming advocacy days, I'm going to get a hotel in the city because there are so many things in Washington, D.C. to see and do in addition to meeting your representatives. It's much easier if you're closer to the central area. Now, the Joint National Committee will have a hotel block set for you, but in case, it's a little bit out of your price range, or if it's not, you know, exactly where you need to be, there are some other options there for you. But the Hyatt Regency in Dulles, I used the airport shuttle for transport. I spent 4 nights there. I came in Friday and checked out on Tuesday. I did have a couple of breakfasts in the morning, so it was under $700 for that trip. Not too bad. Not too bad. And commuting, this is probably my favorite part of going to Washington, D.C., using the D.C. Metro. Now, it's not nearly as involved as, say, like New York or Madrid or anywhere like that, but it is extremely, extremely useful and helpful. Once you get into the center of town, using the DC line, there are trains coming every 5 minutes. So if you miss one, you will only have to wait a short amount of time to get the next one. And around the Capitol building, I believe there are four metro lines that go very close to your meeting buildings. It's extremely cost effective. They have kiosks in the stations where you can purchase, a Metro card. I got an unlimited 3-day pass. It was $30. That's all I had to pay there for that one. Now, I wasn't quite as, quite as up to date of things using like the app that they had, but they will get you a little card and you can use that. It's very, very easy. The other thing is, my mom was very concerned about me using the train there. She didn't think it was safe or anything like that. I can assure you, it is extremely safe. It's very clean and it gives you a lot of time to relax. When I was going back and forth between the hotel and downtown, I had to buy myself an extra book because I finished the two I had brought with me on the train. It also helps you, giving that time to prepare yourself and get ready to go. Use the DC Metro, don't get a rental car. And the other thing, take advantage of a lot of the excursions that are out there in DC. For instance, they do night tours where you can join a bus and at night, when all of the monuments and, government buildings are lit up, you can tour the city and visit some of those monuments under the stars. It's a really great experience and really, really fun. One thing I did make sure to go to is the Holocaust Museum. My personal opinion is this is something everyone should visit at least once. Technically, the ticket cost is $1. Donations are always welcome, and you can register ahead of time, but I would say I probably spent 2.5 hours in that museum. It was very, very moving. The Smithsonian Museums. I'm ashamed to say I didn't realize there were so many in Washington, D.C., but they have museums that cater to any and all interests, not just, um, art or history museums, but, specific ones about National Air and Space Museum, Native American Museum, African art. They're really incredible. So if you get the time, you probably won't be able to go to all of them unless you're really ambitious, but try to pick one or two of them to go to. And the other thing, I'm a Spanish teacher, so anything dealing with Spanish culture and life in general, I am all about it. So they also have La Cosecha, which is a Latin American shop and marketplace. So it was a really fun experience getting to go and have some tapas and some churros con chocolate. It was very much worth the trip on that. So that is kind of my take for my first time in Washington, D.C. If you want a copy of this program, all you have to do is you can snap the QR code. You can also choose this bit.ly link, and I'm actually going to drop this into the chat. So if you're interested, all you have to do is just click on that. Sorry, where is my chat button? I apologize. I'm going to have to stop sharing my screen so I can find my chat window again. Okay. There's the bit.ly that will take you to this presentation that we see on there. What questions do you folks have?
Thank you very much, Danielle. I know nothing about this. This is really informative. And I'm wondering, um, if you want to, okay, if we want to go to the advocacy day in person, how much time do you, should we plan? How many
For
days?
for a trip to DC?
And back and, go a round trip. I mean, also we want to have some fun as well,
Yes, absolutely. Well, the advocacy days, they take place over 2 days. So this upcoming session is going to take place March 9th and 10th. Now, what I'm going to be doing, I'm going to try to fly out on a Friday evening. So that
Oh,
way I have a Saturday, Sunday to get myself ready and, go out, see the sights, all those kinds of things. I'll have the advocacy days on the 9th and 10th, which I think is a Monday, Tuesday.
oh,
Wednesday, interestingly enough, will be a travel day because I will be traveling back to Chicago for the Central States uh, conference. And that will take place March 12th, 13th, and 14th.
okay.
So,
Yeah, it's so close. Yeah.
Well, I mean, at least they're, in the same direction. So going to Washington, D.C., I'll just like, fly back the same direction to Chicago. But
Yeah,
at
that's
least give yourself at least 2 days outside of advocacy days just to get around the city, maybe see, you know, different sites or things,
yeah,
beyond our advocacy efforts.
yeah. And also, a lot of times we don't have the experience talking to someone who is in, the Capitol building. I mean, Capitol Hill. So, uh, what's your suggestion if it is the first time? I mean, we have no experience talking to a person who is, I mean, an expert in politics.
It is true. They are experts of Washington, D.C. and politics, but you are also an expert as well. You're an expert with language education, what we need for languages, all of these things. So it's not, a novice meeting an expert. These are two experts coming together for a specific purpose. And really, I would not call myself the first choice to go and be the advocate for Nebraska, but really, it's just one of those things where you do it once and it becomes much easier the next time. And that's where, if you are fortunate enough to have a large group of people going, go with them and kind of look and see, defer, like, how would you strategize this? And this presentation, it was put together based off of, things I did that I thought I did really well, but then also some things that I, could have done better in the future. For instance, when I was printing out my one pagers for like the bills and the state information, I ran out of copies. So by the time I got to my last meeting, I had no copies to give them, except for the one where I had written notes to myself, which
Okay.
I will not do this next time. I will bring as many copies as I possibly can.
As you have mentioned, they are senators and also they are aides. So we should prepare at least one copy for everybody, right?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
And anticipate that your representatives, both senators and congresspeople, will have two aides. So, for instance, with me, I would meet both of my senators plus their two aides, and the one congressman from my district plus his two potential aides. So, at the bare minimum, I would say maybe bring 10 copies of things.
Okay. Yes, that is really, really helpful. Thank you. That's all my questions. I think we are good. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me, Crystal.
Thank you. I think this is really helpful. I know some teachers are not able to participate today, but I have this recorded. And if they are planning to go to the advocacy day, I think this is really helpful, especially for those, I mean, your personal experience is really helpful in how to talk to different senators based on their different background. I think it never
Absolutely.
come to my mind before you talk about it. Yeah, it's
Well, and again, I didn't, that was one thing I didn't do before this last round was sufficiently get to know my representatives. So I wanted to put all of that information in there as well. But if you plan to, go to Capitol Hill, definitely work with your state organization. If you are going to be a singleton going, see if they have, information. Find the government website for your state. They will have links to your congresspeople and your senators. And like like anything that we do, the first time you do it, it's going to be scary. It's going to, you're not going to feel informed enough. You're not going to feel experienced enough. But, you know, when you learn the ropes, when you get through that first time, it's it's just like riding a bike. And the more times you
thank
do
you.
it, the easier it will become. And the better for your representatives, they'll be able to remember you and put your face to your name much easier.
That is great. And also I think, yeah, advocacy should be a group work and not like an individual, you know,
Absolutely.
advocacy. It should be, also I'm thinking about maybe you go last year, maybe somebody else from Nebraska might join you or might be another singleton and I mean to do that. And also I'm thinking about if you try to help the next singleton or next person, next group, that would be really helpful. Talk to each other. And so you have the, I mean, consistency in your message so that, I mean, the senators won't get confused.
Absolutely. Yes. And I think I think Alicia Shoemaker will be joining me next year. So at least we'll have two, but we're going to try to get some more people in with that. And that's where strategizing and working with multiple state representatives will help kind of solidify your message.
Yeah, that's true. Thank you. I really appreciate your doing this for us. And I hope a lot of teachers can get some ideas from this webinar. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening.
Thank you for hosting me, Crystal. And
Thank
thank you
you.
for joining us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.